Peter Credlin, live on Sky News Australia.
Good evening. Welcome to the show. Great to have your company. Here's what's coming up tonight. Iran's president, the foreign minister too, killed in a shock helicopter crash in the East Azerbaijan province. Now, given Iran's support for Hamas, this comes at a treacherous time for the Middle East. Intelligence expert Michael Shoebridge joins me to discuss the ramifications from this crash. Labor seeks to gain more power with its submission to redraw electoral boundaries in New South Wales. This is for the federal election. Impacted very much the member for Fowler, the independent Diane Lee. She could be headed for a showdown with Labor's Chris Bowen if these changes go ahead. Diane Lee joins me tonight. The scandalous voter entitlement changes, which could impact the eligibility of up to 1 million voters, designed to hand even more power to the left. Labor was trying to get these changes through by stealth. Well, tonight I'll expose exactly what they're trying to do and why it matters so much. And almost 1 week on now from Tuesday's budget, voters are refusing to swallow the Treasurer's spin. The latest polls, there's 3 out today, one revealing that voters, 70% of them, are not sold on the budget's economic benefits. They're worried about housing, and migration is shaping up as a key election issue.
If the Treasurer is saying that the economy can only function with migration numbers at an historic high, and that the price of that is people not being able to find a home, then I don't sign up to Jim Chalmers' form of voodoo economics. Let's be very clear about it. I believe very strongly that there is enormous economic growth in what we've proposed.
Let's stay with the budget. It is absolutely game on, isn't it? We've had the government's budget, then the opposition's address in reply. I think we're headed for an early election. Now, that doesn't mean that Labor will go early, because a whole raft of things get weighed up by a Prime Minister and a campaign director before they pull the trigger. But what it does mean, and we can say this without qualification, is that last week's budget is designed to give the Prime Minister the option to call it early, the flexibility that if things go south for the economy, he can get to the polls before you wake up. Sounds cynical, I know, but that's a sort of hard-headed calculation going on inside Labor's campaign headquarters. And I speak with a bit of understanding here because my husband was the bloke who for 14 years ran the campaign headquarters for the Liberals. 2 elections for John Howard, 2, of course, for Tony Abbott. So believe me, Labor is getting ready to go, but no decisions have yet been made. The Prime Minister himself, well, he will not yet have made a call on an early election. He'll have an open mind right now, but he'll want all the ducks lined up. He'll want his candidates pre-selected. He'll want his policies done so that he's got the option to call it when it's in his best political interests, because options and flexibility, that is key in a campaign, particularly for the incumbent. As I wrote in the weekend papers, what was on display last week were 2 quite different approaches to government, meaning that for the first time since 2013, the Abbott election in promising to repeal a carbon tax, stop the boats, all of that, I reckon we're going to actually have an election this time where there's a clear choice between the 2 major parties. On the Labor side, they want to close down our resource industries and rapidly shift Australia to a net zero economy with big government to force you there if necessary and use taxpayer funds to mask any pain. The Coalition, by contrast, well, it wants to pull back Australia from the energy cliff that Labor's taking us over, reduce the pace of change and push back against its politically correct excesses, things like unsustainably high immigration. In terms of Labor's pre-election sweeteners, the tax cuts, the handouts, wafer-thin surplus, doesn't get much better than that, or at least that's what the government wants you to think. But it seems in polls, and there's been 3, as I said, over the past couple of days, voters haven't really been that impressed. Today's news poll shows a slight uptick in the government's standing. Labor's primary vote up to 34%, and the Coalition's dropping now to 37%. With all the budget publicity and the millions they're going to spend on government advertising, I'm not surprised. But the budget itself, well, it's a bit of a flop, despite all those goodies, with just 27% of voters thinking the budget's good for the economy. Now, this is the worst score for a budget since they first started polling that question back in 1999. As well, 46% of you said the budget would be neither good nor bad for the economy. That's another record result. Labor spending billions of dollars and end up with almost half the electorate lukewarm, to say the least. About the only win that Labor can bank is that the PM's net favourability rating has returned to neutral. So as many people like him as don't like him. Now, if you're inside Labor, that's a move you'd be pretty happy with because he's been in net negative territory since The Voice, meaning more people disliked him than liked him. But while that's a small win for the Prime Minister, my instincts are the public are as yet unconvinced by either side. Voters know that government won the election last time under false pretences, a Green Left Party pretending that they were safe change, and that they've utterly failed to deliver on their promises to cut your power bill, keep interest rates low, and to boost your real wages. But they've not yet persuaded, that the opposition have not yet persuaded people that they would actually be changed for the better. Now, I think voters want much lower immigration. That's clear, because they know that immigration at these record levels, 1 million newcomers in just the past 2 years, is toxic for cost of living. But they'd also like to see a bit more detail from Peter Dutton on how he's going to make it all happen, despite his good record as a minister. Ditto on energy. I mean, they like the idea of nuclear power, and I have to say it's a gutsy move by the coalition to put it on the table. But they want more information now, the what, the where, the how. So watch this space. I think that's very much imminent. The battle lines for the next election, they are clearly drawn. Housing, cost of living, energy, immigration. Immigration, of course, feeding into everything. Whichever party has the most convincing offering here will be in the box seat of the next election, because Labor's big Australia push, and that is the kicker, it's on the nose with voters on the right, on the left, and everywhere in between. Well, let's go to Canberra now. Trudy McIntosh with the headlines.
The opposition is under pressure to explain whether its proposed cuts to migration will hurt the economy.
Last week, Peter Dutton unveiled his plan to slash migration and cap international student numbers to help ease housing pressures.
We can't abide a situation where you bring in a population bigger than Adelaide's in a 5-year period and not have homes for them.
He has a vibe, not a policy. When you look at the detail, it simply isn't there. No costings, no understanding about impact on the economy.
The Treasurer claims the coalition proposal will punch a hole in the budget.
It will cost the economy billions of dollars.
I don't sign up to Jim Chalmers' form of voodoo economics.
Corporate watchdog ASIC says banks are not doing enough to help struggling borrowers.
ASIC reviewed hardship arrangements of 10 large lenders. It found 1 in 3 customers trying to apply for hardship assistance drop out because the process is too complicated.
What this report shows, however, is that banks and lenders are falling short of the community's expectations.
And Premier's push to impose age restrictions for children accessing social media.
The truth of the matter is that social media and access to it is a giant experiment that we're conducting on young people, and it's basically unregulated.
The New South Wales leader says he won't wait for federal action to stop young children accessing platforms like Instagram and TikTok.
My suspicion is it would be better to move as a nation, but the New South Wales government isn't going to wait for that.
I know that it's very hard for parents to regulate that themselves. I think that discussion is really useful.
South Australia has already floated an age ban for children under 14. Chris Minns says it may need to be higher.
16 should be, in my view, the minimum age.
We'll let those big states have a good look at what they can possibly do, let them do the work around legislation, but I am very supportive of it.
Trudy McIntosh, Sky News, Canberra.
All right, what happens now between last week's budget and, of course, the return of Parliament for 2 weeks? House sits for 2 weeks, and then you have 2 weeks of budget Senate estimates. That's looming. This week, everyone's on the road. This is the big week that the opposition and the government plan to hit the road and convince you their budget's good, and the opposition leader says, no, it's not. My plan is better. Early election, potentially. That means they're out there pretty hard today. And the polls, 3 out. Not great news for Labor, certainly not in the detail on the budget, but I've got to be honest, plenty of work for the coalition to do too. Let's pull it all apart. National editor at the Australian, Dennis Shanahan. Well, I just said at the top of the show, Dennis, I mean, clearly now I feel like there's a sense, I'm sure you can agree here, that we've got some line and length from both sides. You know, we see these battle lines for the election. We know certainly there's going to be a fight about housing, immigration from the opposition leader, absolutely squarely on the table. The Treasurer today still pushing his line, though, that his budget spend will not be inflationary. Now, the experts disagree. And in most of the polls out today, when they ask the specific, are you worried about your rates? Are you concerned about inflation? Voters are not with the Treasurer here. The Australian Financial Review, we'd had a poll out saying voters fear a budget will raise rates. A similar sort of number there, 40% I think it was in that case, in your poll, in News Poll. I'll get into the guts of News Poll in a moment, but housing and immigration, Dennis, do you think that is the two big battle line issues?
Oh, certainly. Housing and immigration have become welded together. They are now the one topic, and Peter Dutton's done quite a good job in making them one topic because they are actually the symptoms of the greater problems of cost of living. And cost of living is also driven by energy. And so what Peter Dutton has done, he has made immigration, housing interchangeable as major problems on the back of a cost of living crisis and concerns about the price of energy. These are the four topics we are going to see all the way through to the election and at the election. The opposition is trying to look at the longer term, and as you mentioned, the Fin Review poll, the Freshwater poll, what people are looking at is the longer term. They are no longer just accepting the short-term giveaways, and they are asking the harder questions about long-term economic policy, and housing and immigration are at the heart of that.
Yeah, I think you're right to say that they are looking much further out. We saw this consistently across those three polls, Dennis. And I think the voter is quite shrewd here. Of course, they're going to put the money in their pocket. They're doing it tough, although those energy rebates go to the energy company, not to individuals. But they're worried about rates. They're worried about talk. There might be a rise now, not the cuts they thought were coming. They're worried about inflation. They get inflation. You know, a lot of people in Canberra don't think ordinary people out there get something like inflation. They do. They feel it, but they understand how much it's hurting them longer term. In your News Poll today, there was a small uptick for the government. It's still behind the coalition in primary vote terms. But this is interesting. 27% only of people thought the budget was good for the economy. Now, that is the lowest on record since News Poll asked the question in 1999. We're talking back there, the GST election. That's got to be sobering for Labor.
Oh, indeed. And Peter, I've been at the Australian for all of those news polls on the budget since 1999. And what is remarkable, I have great faith in the Australian electorate. I think it is politically savvy, and I think it is more economically numerate than a lot of populations around the world, partly because I think of compulsory voting. But that aside, the public is alert to what is happening in the broader economy. And in the past, they have actually rewarded treasurers, and I'm thinking here of Peter Costello, for taking tough action at a budget, even when they say they are going to be worse off as a budget. Now, this budget was designed to make people better off and claim to be deflationary and good for the economy. Well, that poll today shows that people aren't buying it. The Freshwater poll as well. People don't believe it's going to achieve the objects that the Treasurer set out, and they are still fearful of interest rate rises and continuing inflation. I don't think the budget line has worked so far for the Australian population.
I think alongside compulsory voting too, Dennis, Australia's got one of the highest ratios of shareholder in the world. I mean, most of that's obviously through our superannuation funds, but people are engaged in the markets. They're watching the economy. Our news is at night. They run a share market update. They run through the markets. They run through the Aussie dollar and how we're pegging overseas. You watch news programs internationally. They don't have that financial data in the news broadcast. I think that's where we've got such an informed Australian electorate. You're spot on. Canberra doesn't think that. You and I know. We know the people out there are smarter than Canberra thinks they are. The other poll, I said there were three. This is the third one. Resolve Political Monitor. It shows that a big cut to immigration is well supported by voters. 66%, two-thirds saying last year's intake was too high. Here's the Treasurer again on the defensive today.
The budget will put downward pressure on inflation, not upward pressure on inflation. The way that we are managing the budget and the economy responsibly, combined with the way that we've designed our cost of living help, will be part of the solution to our inflation challenge, not part of the problem.
And this is the problem. Labor's wedged itself on Big Australia. They love Big Australia. They hope all these migrants will eventually vote for Labor, but they've needed big migration numbers to basically stave off a recession, and now they're caught here.
Well, indeed. And look, it's not just Labor. Labor has pushed it high. There's no doubt about it. And we've seen record levels now. But over the decades, governments have relied on high immigration just to artificially push the economy along. Well, it's got to the stage where it's not working anymore. There are too many people, and even the Treasurer has admitted that there is a housing crisis. Labor's policy is now to drastically cut immigration. So how is it that Labor can say, yes, we are trying to cut immigration, we have to do that, and then, if the Leader of the Opposition says he's going to do it, it's bad for the economy? Jim Chalmers is caught between a rock and a hard place here. He's trying to argue for lower immigration because that's what the majority, 66%, want. Labor is seen to have introduced and has introduced record high levels of inflation, of immigration since COVID, and now they are trying to argue that further cuts from the Leader of the Opposition would actually hurt the economy. They can't have it both ways, and what Australia needs is a controlled and planned immigration policy in accordance with what is happening with the economy.
I say this again, I've been talking about immigration now for about 5 years. We have a plan for everything in government. Most departments have a big strategic agenda. The only plan we do not have as a country is a fair income population plan. And the fact that we don't, the fact that the politicians on the left and the right do not want it written down, do not want it debated, means it's all about the economics. It's about this fakery in the budget, Dennis. And I think Australians are actually calling them out over this. Assistant Minister for the Republic, it looks like he's going to go to God. Well, not the MP. He'll stay on likely in the front bench. He's got some other bits to his portfolio. But the talk is the Prime Minister's going to dump this Republic title on his front bench. And of course, heightened speculation today of a mid-year reshuffle. Well, I think that's right. They've got to dump that title out of that area. And they've also got to dump some that are underperformers. I mean, I cannot believe they can go to an election with Claire O'Neill and Andrew Giles in those particular immigration portfolios. I think there'd be a massive campaign liability, both of them. Do you think we're going to have a reshuffle over the break?
Well, just on the point about the Republican assistant minister, that's pretty small beer in the broader picture. Anthony Albanese has made it clear, even today, that he's not going to embark on any more referendums. The last thing he wants to do about that terrible mistake he made about promising to hold a referendum on the Indigenous voice to Parliament is have another referendum. And so that's out of the question. And I think that the much larger question is about a reshuffle, not just on the front bench of the government, but on the front bench of the opposition. And I think that the government certainly needs to dump some of these underperformers. Once we get past some of the immigration issues, we need to see a big shake-up in immigration and home affairs. They have been a complete failure for the entire period of the Albanese government. That's just the start. I think that Jim Chalmers is obviously doing the best he can, but I think that at the same time, Peter Dutton needs to look at firing up and promoting some of the younger, more junior people he has in positions, because I think some of the senior team are not cutting through. And, you know, when push comes to shove, we're going to have an election in the next 12 months and people will be looking for an credible alternative, not just Prime Minister, but team. And Peter Dutton can't do it all on his own, and nor can Anthony Albanese.
I have to say I agree with you on the coalition as much as I agree with you on Labor. I think Dutton's got some dead wood. I think he's got some lazy buggers in there that he needs to send back to the back of the backbench to wake them up a bit and put some young and hungry ones out there at the front, because it does look like he really is the tent pole there for the opposition. There's not a spread of effort as there should be when they're this promising in the polls. I wrote about this yesterday. We'll finish here if we can, Dennis. The judgment of the PM in his office. I wrote about this yesterday. This is the decision by the Prime Minister to evict his tenant. It got a huge reaction in the paper. I mean, he's got 4 homes to live in, 2, of course, that we pay for. The bloke he's kicking out, well, he's just got 1 home. He'll be kicked out and into the rental market in the middle of a housing crisis. Absolutely, he's got the right to decide who lives in his house, right? That's the gift of any landlord. But you've got to question the political judgment of the PM at this time, don't you?
Well, I think you're being a bit harsh and a little bit unfair there, Peter. Prime Ministers can't win on this.
In what way?
The only thing they can do... Well, because if they are elected and they keep the investments they have, they keep shares they have, even if they put them in a trust like Malcolm Turnbull did, there's always a problem with what they've got. John Howard decided to get rid of all his shares when he became Prime Minister, and it was the only way to do it. And I think Anthony Albanese hasn't evicted his tenant. He's selling his house. And good on somebody from the Housing Commission who has an investment property. Good on him. Well done. And I think that he has handled it poorly. That's not entirely his fault. I don't think his office had anything to do really with what he was doing. It's always a bad look and it's always hard. Kevin Rudd's wife had to try and divest herself of her very, interesting business, a very vigorous business. And so I think
Come on, Dennis, I can't disagree with you here.
No.
I can't agree with you. I can't agree with you here. We're in the middle of a housing crisis. His office does know. His office would be involved in the decision because they have to update the ministerial entitlement, so it is a discussion internally. But the third point I'd make, John Howard in the end didn't rent out his home in Woolston Croft because it was just not worth the political headache. And Abbott never rented out his family home. I mean, he always said, if I'm living in a house courtesy of the taxpayer, I look like I'm greedy if I rent out my private home at the same time. Why does the Prime Minister, given he's got 2 homes, it's a housing crisis, he was a single man, it's not like he's going to sell this house and he and Jodie are going to move into it or any of these properties while he's got the lodge in Kirribilli. I just think it's an own goal at a time when he's on the back foot over housing.
Well, I disagree with you, Peter. I think that he didn't have any choice. Yes, the headlines haven't been good. He actually persevered with a lower rent during the COVID pandemic. He was a good landlord. He wants to sell the house. OK, and, let's move on from it. He's got to do it.
All right.
And I think that, yes, he would have told the office and he's got to do the registration. I understand all of that, but I'm sure that he didn't go into his office and ask them whether he should sell his house or not. So, yes, we can agree to disagree on that, Peter, but I don't think that PMs of any flavour can win on this issue.
I like a bit of civil disagreement, Dennis Shanahan, on this program. You'll stay on the PM's Christmas card list, and I suspect I'm off it, but I think I was off it anyway. Good to see you, Dennis. We'll see you next week. All right, overseas now. Let's get into that state media issue out of Iran. The President, Ibrahim Raisi, has been declared dead along with the foreign minister after a helicopter they were travelling in crashed in a mountainous region in Iran's northwest. Raisi was travelling with the foreign minister when officials say the aircraft was forced to make a hard landing due to dense fog. That's certainly what the pictures were showing us. I saw a little bit earlier in the day when they went to the crash site. Let's get some detail, though. Founder and Director of Strategic Analysis Australia, Michael Shoebridge. Well, Michael, as I said, the official line out there was this forcing down of the aircraft was due to fog, had a hard landing. You know, there's been no survivors, we're told. Do you think this is accurate? Do you think this is accurate and that there's nothing else more sinister at play?
Well, Peter, I don't think it's accurate because I don't think it had a hard landing. I think it had what is technically known as a crash. They flew the helicopter into a mountain in atrocious weather where they couldn't see where they were going. The Iranians have done this all by themselves. So they may stoke rumours about other people, but they put their president and their foreign minister in an old helicopter, flew it when they couldn't see where they were going into a mountain. It's simple.
All right, talk to me then about the leadership structure here, because remind me, but as I understand it, you've got the supreme leader, the Ayatollah. He's number one, most senior political figure. This is the president, number two, influential and important. What happens now? Is there like convulsions in their political system? Will there be an orderly transition? Take us through what happens.
Well, this will be a huge shock because President Raisi was the half-anointed successor for the 85-year-old current Supreme Leader, Ayatollah Khamenei. So his loss will shock the Iranian system. What happens now is the senior vice president will step up temporarily as acting president, and they'll hold a rigged election within 50 days. And there's no doubt that only a hardliner that does exactly what Supreme Leader Khamenei wants will get the job. So I think the Supreme Leader really let the cat out of the bag before he even knew the President and Foreign Minister were dead when he said there'll be no interruption to how Iran is governed because he's the autocrat.
So how does this all play out in relation to the Gaza war? Because we know Iran's heavily involved with Hamas. What happens there?
Well, personal relationships between Hamas and Hezbollah and the Iranian regime really matter, and President Raisi had those relationships. Hamas has expressed great concern when they heard about the crash. They will actually see this as a setback, but the relationship between Iran, Hamas and Hezbollah is deep, and I think we'll see the Iranians try to just get on with business. But it does really put a crack on the professionalism of the Iranian government to put their president and foreign minister in this old helicopter and fly it into a mountain.
Well, let's come back home now. This new report out today that the government's plan to extend the life of the ageing Collins class, which we need to, given we haven't got the Virginia class and then obviously the Australian-built submarines on the horizon any time soon. We're told this is a high-risk endeavour. What are the concerns?
Well, the big issues are crewing, but also when you're trying to upgrade these Collins-class submarines, their hulls are in pretty good shape because they haven't done a lot of diving, but you've got to scoop out everything inside them, the sonars, the combat system, the electronics, the propulsion system, put a new submarine inside the old shell. That's extremely complicated, very technically high risk and crazily expensive, in addition to all the money going on the nuclear submarines. And Defence has been putting off announcing what they're going to do because I think the enormity of the task is really coming home. There's a risk we'll have to retire the Collins before we've got decent Virginia numbers.
That is the reality, isn't it?
Yes, and it's almost inescapable because aside from having to put a new submarine in the old Collins shells, the Virginia-class submarines eat 3 Collins crews per submarine. So even if you can refurbish the submarine, the Navy will probably cannibalise itself to put people in the Virginias.
Just staying with national security, if I can, we talked about this Future Made in Australia plan from the government, $1 billion to a US-based firm for quantum computing. Plenty of analysis out today saying if the Albanese government only invests in Psi Quantum, this is the US-based firm, $1 billion that they'll receive, and if they don't invest in any other options, we're putting a lot of eggs in this basket. There's a national security concern, they say.
Well, the problem here is that the Albanese government is pretending it's Warren Buffett or the world's most successful venture capitalist investor. So they've made an all-in bet on one quantum company. They've made another bet on a Sydney program with Michelle Simmons. But these are very early investments. I just don't think the government knows enough to pick a winner.
Yeah, well, I think we agree with that. Michael Shoebridge, thank you as always. After the break, Labor's sneaky attempt to tip the balance in their favour in New South Wales with changes to the electoral boundaries. The MP under the gun, Independent Di Lee, joins me next. Plus, banks on notice as millions of Australians face financial hardship but are finding it too difficult to get the help that's been promised. Welcome back. The Environmental Defenders Office, the activist mob that run legal campaigns against coal and gas, well, it looks set to continue to receive millions in taxpayer support. I'll have more on that coming up. But first, with an early election at least on the table following the release of the budget, our proposed redistribution is likely to pit Energy Minister Chris Bowen against very popular independent Di Lee. And he looks to be getting more Labor-aligned suburbs as part of the shake-up. The redistribution was triggered when the number of members in the House of Reps for New South Wales dropped from 47 to 46 last year. And it's not the only redistribution. There's a number of them happening around the country. For her take, the woman in the hot seat, the member for Fowler, Di Lee. Di, great to have you on the program, but I have to say you must be good at your job because you've got Labor choosing to take you on over this redistribution option rather than a teal seat.
Yeah, look, they must be concerned with the present boundaries, I have no doubt. And obviously, with the energy prices, it's a big issue out here in Western Sydney, and in particular, my Fowler community. Look, you know, that's Labor's proposal. I mean, my suggestion to the AEC was to retain the current electorate, because I love representing my Fowler community, which stretches from the Liverpool CBD right up into the majority of suburbs within Fairfield City Council area. So, you know, these two electorates, as you know, Peter, there was a big no vote at the last Voice campaign. So there must be concern for them to be suggesting this. Whether or not the AEC will take on board the Labor Party suggestions or any major party suggestions, is up to the AEC. But I hope that the AEC is independent enough to make their own decision on the boundaries, how to be drawn the boundaries.
Mm-hmm. We think that, well, I agree with you. Across the board, we hope the AEC is independent, doesn't favour one side of politics over the other, because we obviously need to have boundaries that are beyond reproach, that we're not in a gerrymander sort of situation in this country. It's interesting you pointed out that the no vote there in Western Sydney really significantly went against the government, went against the Prime Minister. There's reports that the PM and the Treasurer are going to spend a fair amount of time in Western Sydney this week selling their budget. I think the Voice and the result from the Voice is really why they're putting the effort in out there. The budget, if you look at the polls out today, hasn't boosted them perhaps like they'd hoped. Give us a sense, Di, how's the budget gone down in your community?
Well, surprisingly, you asked me that question because I actually went door knocking today. I have been door knocking for the last few weeks, and it's surprising, renters, pensioners, owners, homeowners are talking about how much they're struggling, even for couples. And I said, what do you think of the government's $300, rebate that's offered? They said that's going to be disappearing in a puff, because that $300 doesn't keep up with the increase in food costs, groceries, shopping, electricity increase, insurance coverage increase as well as mortgage and rent. So and childcare, by the way, I was surprised, people were telling me that sending their kids into childcare has gone up, even though the government did promise cheaper childcare. So I'm going to look into that, because a couple said there's no point in them working part-time, because increasing their salary means that they have to actually increase in the childcare costs. So people are actually feeling it and going out there knocking. And, if the Prime Minister and the Treasurer are visiting Western Sydney, can I suggest they come to Fowler, which I believe is the heart of Western Sydney, and they have not reached out to me, and I hope they come and see Fowler and visit out here, because it is community that's really representing the microcosm of the struggles of families, small business, working Australian students, you name it, it is here in our community in Fowler.
Given the multicultural nature of Western Sydney in particular, I've got to ask you, immigration, we heard from the opposition leader last Thursday night saying that there would be a 25% cut if he was elected. Polls today, close to 70% of voters saying last year our numbers, our intake was way, way too high. You're an electorate of migrants. It can be interesting how they feel about migration, not always as you might think it would be. Any reaction from your electorate?
Look, we are one of the most multicultural and multi-faith electorates in the country. And we have, I was a refugee, so, and many of my team are from migrant and refugee backgrounds. So we understand very much that journey and that the opportunities that Australia has offered. But in door knocking, people have said, perhaps we need to slow it down. They understand we need to resettle. In Fairfield City, I don't know if you know this, Peter, but we've settled out of the 12,000 refugees that came to Australia in the last 7 years, at least 10,000 were resettled here in Fairfield City Council, which makes up the majority of Fowler electorate. So we actually, our community, have really shouldered the burden of refugee settlement with no extra additional resources. I get people telling me about, our train, which is part of state government, of course, but has not been improved. We get old trains, roads. Our hospital hasn't been upgraded since 1989, or our other major hospital is really, under-resourced as well. So we've got all of these challenges whereby we've had 10,000 out of 12,000. So people are saying to me, we are migrants, we understand that, but we need to plan it and manage in a way so that our community, our families here, do not have to struggle. Rent is high and not enough affordable housing for us, for families here. They can't save to buy their first home.
As I said, it's not always a predictable issue with migrant communities. Di, that's a massive resettlement job Fairfield's done. I think that'll play out in the election, absolutely. Thank you for your time. Good luck beating the Labor machine when they get the pen out and they draw those boundaries. Thanks, Di. After the break, the Environmental Defender's Office back using your money to fight the government. Seems crazy, doesn't it? Plus, the Union Slush Fund quietly got $60 million plus in the budget. What you need to know about that after the break with my panel. Welcome back. Serious concerns have been raised about changes to the law in Victoria that could see thousands of voters deemed ineligible, slanting things very much in favour of Labor and the Greens. Now, I couldn't believe about this when I read about it over the weekend. Randall Killip from Small Business Australia will join me a little later to fill you in. But first, let's bring in my panel. LNP MP Keith Pitt, former Howard Government Minister too, Gary Hargreaves. Gents, we've got a lot to get through tonight. Peter. I want your top line take, if I can. I'll start with you, Keith. The battle lines for the election, absolutely housing and immigration. Good on your boss for being pretty straight with the numbers there. 25% if elected. The coalition will drop the numbers. Do you think you're in the game now?
Oh, Peter, absolutely. We're always in the game, and it's because the Albanese government's so poor. But when you look at housing, I got asked about this today, and to be honest, mate, whatever it takes. I've got people living in cars and tents and under bridges and caravans. That's not the Australia I know. I've never seen anything like this. So whatever it takes to fix that, that's what we need to do.
Gary, I said you know, it's not certain they'll go early, but my experience, certainly vicariously through my husband who's run campaigns, is they're giving Labor's giving the Prime Minister every option there, every suite of option he might need to pull the trigger if he needs to pull the trigger before the economy sort of tanks at the end of the year. Do you think they'll go early?
Number one job of a Prime Minister is to win that next election, Peter. So I know in my heart of hearts they'll go when they think they have. They'll go when they think they can win. That's usually the story. And look, whether people get sacrificed along the way, well, time shall tell. But I think Australians need to be very cynical about this, because I think to the point you wrote about on the weekend papers, $300, is that really it? Is that the price of our vote? We were promised $275 last time. I know inflation's higher than that, so it's $300 is the promise now. Fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me, I say. We'll see.
What about the Environmental Defender's Office? You know, all of the concerns expressed there, Keith, about coaching witnesses, stuff that just really wasn't passing a propriety test. They've now been cleared, though, to go back on the taxpayer teat, to basically use taxpayers' money to fight the taxpayers through the Commonwealth government. This is lawfare about gas and coal, and we're paying for it.
Oh, Peter, for my sins, I went and looked at their website before the program, and they're apparently out there to protect native forests and all of those other things, but they're a bit selective. They don't seem to want to defend the ones that are getting absolutely hammered through wind farm implementation or solar panels, or the things that are actually destroying real critical and endangered areas like koala habitat, nowhere to be seen. But you're on the money. They are very happy to take the taxpayers' funds to try and stop offshore gas in the main and onshore anything to do with mining. You're only going to look at the Adani drama and what happened with Barossa, and I just think that's outrageous.
Yep. And given the stupid old government's handing them the money, if you read your own budget papers, you'd shortly say with Labor, if it wasn't for resources, there wouldn't be a skinny surplus. You know, Chalmers would be standing there with a fig leaf, if that, on budget night. This is the wrong-headedness of it all. And Gary, too, it's always a couple of days after the budget, isn't it? We find out, you know, these little slush funds hidden away. We learn $60 million in the budget for the union mates. But what about this? This wasn't mentioned in Tony Burke's budget night media release. This is a pork barrel.
Not only that, it's the single biggest expenditure in his department, and it doesn't even get the disclosure of a media statement. Look, this is actually not a union slush fund. This is a union thug fund, because what they do is they hire people to go around and put pressure on employers to use their unionised training system, which then puts more money through the union book. It's very simple. They are trying to drive small training companies out of business, put people into big government TAFEs, highly unionised TAFEs, and or union organised training organisations. This doesn't necessarily get people trained up quick. It just simply means the money flows to the union movement. Again, fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. We've got to stare this stuff down. Real simple.
Gary's spot on there. They don't get the money from union fees anymore, because less than 9% of people in private industry actually belong to a union. They get it through these sham training deals that they force people through an EBA to put the money into. It goes back to the Labor Party as a donation. And then they've got all the other money coming through the super funds. That's the modern Labor financial machine at work. I've got to ask you, Keith, you got a dodgy dam built by Labor. You got all of these people, horticulturalists, moved to your region, booming industry, growing staff, exporting it around the world. Then they said, geez, there's a problem with the dam, we better fix it. Or your businesses said, yeah, please fix it because we've invested millions of dollars and there's jobs and exports coming out of here. We need the water. But it doesn't look like your dam's anything more than smoke and mirrors money.
It's awful.
Peter, it's the biggest public infrastructure failure in Australia's history. And the spinners have been out working hard saying, oh, it's only deferred, it's deferred. Well, it's not deferred to year 2 or year 3 or year 4 or year 5. It's just completely deferred right out. And last time I checked, that was a cut. And Cole Boyce, the member for Flynn, asked in question time last week to the PM, you know, what's happened to this? You promised this money and it's gone. Tanya Plibersek got the handball for the answer. And they actually thought it was funny. They both had a good belly laugh. Well, no one here thinks it's funny. they're at risk of losing their properties and their investments. We need that dam fixed. We need that money in the budget, and it is an absolute disgrace they've tried to spin their way out of this and say that the money is just deferred. It is not there. Have a look at page 57 of Budget Paper 2. It's gone.
Good on you, Keith. Keep fighting for it because it's a huge employer in your region. Just quickly, Gary, Twiggy Forrest comes out and says nuclear power is way too expensive, and anyone who's out there promoting it is stoking division for political purposes. Now, he's the same bloke who's got his hand in our pocket wanting billions of dollars from taxpayers for green hydro. I can point to a dozen of countries that have got a nuclear power station that's operational. I can't find one country that's got green hydrogen that's operational at scale. Who's pulling whose leg here?
Yeah, holy Hindenburg. I mean, let's face it, the whole Zeppelin thing was 100 years ago, and now they're talking about building planes powered by hydrogen. I mean, look, the whole thing is about rent seekers, Peter, and if you think that a subsidy comes from some magic subsidy tree, no, it comes from your hip pocket. If you think you're paying tax on a lot of things now, looking about, funeral taxes and heaven knows whatever else in some states, and if you think you're paying a lot for electricity now, then these billionaires want more of your money. Just keep paying more money through subsidies, and that'll end up in their pockets. The rich are getting richer and the poor get the picture, to quote Peter Garrett. Oh, isn't the irony wonderful? It's really got to be stared down.
Hey, just before we go, you mentioned a funeral tax, and you're not kidding there, are you?
No, I'm not. No, this is what they're talking about. They're saying, well, let's bring in extra levies as people get cremated and buried and so forth. Death and taxes, Keith, exactly right. And Peter, this is the modern Labor Party. They just want to find new ways to tax you. If you think you got your money safe in super funds, think again. If you think you got your money safe in the banks, think again. This is very scary stuff, and the serious part is they're after all of our money. They want us poor, on our knees and dependent on government, and the people have got to rise up, because if you accept this, it's just going to get worse. It's just going to get worse.
I'll leave it there, gents. See you both next week. After the break, we'll get into those local council election changes. I tell you what, they're crook. It is crook. Stay with me after the break. If you live in Victoria, you may not be aware of changes to local council elections, which could affect up to 1 million voters. It's a change that's been labelled scandalous because this year, property owners and businesses who've been thrown off the roll all need to re-enrol before a looming deadline, or they lose their right to have a vote. For more on this, I'm joined by Randall Killip from Small Business Australia. Randall, I tell you, if I was cynical, I'd say this is about getting anyone who might be centre-right, conservative, small business, anyone like that off the roll. What's prompted these changes?
Yeah, scandalous is the word. There's no question about that, Peter. What we've looked at here is that it was arranged by the Labor government back in 2020. They used the word integrity of elections when they brought these changes in. They're implemented by Adam Somyurak. We knew a thing about manipulation of numbers, and anyone who's ever been behind the scenes at a council election would be more than aware that manipulation of preference flows is how you get elected. So it's not always the ones with the most votes who win, but if you can pull votes, if you can target specific voters, you'll know a vote for me, and exclude those that you don't think will or may not, well, it'll certainly affect the outcomes. And that's what prompted us at Small Business Australia to go out and reach out to these councils, Peter, and say, what are you doing about it? How are you reaching out to these people?
Yeah, but if they're not going to kick the renters off the roll, they're only going to kick small business and property owners off the roll. I mean, this is a real distortion of democracy. And why go after the small business person? Because we know in some council areas like the City of Melbourne, there's 2 votes for the small business vote as opposed to the residential renter or homeowner. So this is about trying to shut down the voice of small business.
Absolutely, no question. That's what this is all about. It's all about shutting down the voice of small business. What you're seeing here is if you can run a really well-coordinated campaign, you get yourself elected to council. If you can manipulate who votes, when they vote and how they vote, even more so. What's really concerning was that when we reached out to the councils and asked them what proactive steps in order to put yourself, to contact those that voting and need to vote, who have losing their right to vote, what occurred simply was that they hadn't done so. There's no steps at all. Only 3 out of 31 metropolitan Melbourne councils did have information available on their website as to how to join the council roll. So if you contact these councils, it's chaotic. It's absolute chaos. Many have no idea about how to join the roll. They'll tell you to contact the VEC. The VEC will tell you to contact council. So actually protecting your right to vote is extremely difficult. A little shocked by what happened. It was astounding. It was absolutely astounding, and no doubt an effort to manipulate votes, which is very concerning.
Yeah, we're going to just run out of time, but we've got the details there on the website. I urge anyone, if you need to check your enrolment, if you are a small business, you are a property owner, you're worried about whether you're actually being thrown off the roll, that means you will not be able to vote, please go to that address there on the screen just below me and have a look and make sure you get re-enrolled ASAP, because I think they're bringing forward the deadline to stop you even getting re-enrolled. Thank you, Randall. Thanks for the information. All right, that's it for me. Back tomorrow night at 6. Here's Andrew.